90 days, Luke gives us one verse to cover all of them. 14 words in Greek, 3 months of two women living under the same roof, cooking together, sleeping under the same ceiling, sharing a secret that would have gotten both of them killed in a different century. Luke 1:56. Mary stayed with Elizabeth about 3 months and then returned to her home. That's it. The whole record, 90 days erased into a single sentence. But here's what Luke doesn't tell you, and it changes everything about what happens next in Mary's story. Something happened in that house that made Mary strong enough to survive what was coming.
I feel the child move.
She walked in as a refugee. She walked out ready to face a village that wanted to destroy her. What happened in those 90 days? Let's go inside. The first thing Mary would have noticed space. Elizabeth's husband Zechariah was a priest, a Cohen of the division of Abijah, not wealthy, not aristocratic, but a step above a Galilean Tecton's family. Priestly households had plastered walls instead of bare stone, paved courtyards instead of packed dirt, a mikveh, a stepped ritual immersion pool, cut into the bedrock beneath the house because priests had to be ritually pure before temple service. Mary had spent her entire life in a one-room house with an earthen floor. Walking into Elizabeth's home was like walking into a different country. But the biggest difference wasn't the walls or the floor or the mikveh. It was the silence.
He is listening.
Zechariah was mute. Luke 1:20, when Zechariah doubted Gabriel's announcement in the temple, the angel struck him silent. You will not be able to speak until the day these things take place. So during the entire 3 months of Mary's visit, the male head of the household, the priest, the authority, the voice that would normally dominate every room he entered, could not speak. He communicated through gestures, through writing on wax tablets, through the improvised sign language that develops when someone who talked for 60 years suddenly can't. Now think about what that means for the atmosphere of this house. In Mary's world, in every house she'd ever been, in every synagogue, every village, gathering men's voices set the rhythm. Men spoke, women listened. That was the architecture of sound in first century Galilee. Here the architecture was inverted. The only voices in this house belonged to two women. And the only man present had been specifically silenced by the same God who had made both of them pregnant. For the first time in her life, Mary lived in a space where women's voices were the dominant sound. Nobody planned it that way. Nobody made a political statement. But for 90 days, two women filled the silence, and a priest sat among them listening. Remember this detail. It matters for what Mary says next, the Magnificat. The most radical speech by any woman in the ancient world didn't come from nowhere. It came from 3 months in a house where a woman's voice was the loudest voice in the room. But that's the next video. We're not there yet. Elizabeth was roughly 7 months pregnant when Mary arrived. Mary was roughly 6 weeks. Think about what that means in practical terms. Elizabeth was a walking preview of Mary's future. Everything Mary's body would do in the coming months, the expansion, the weight, the shifting center of gravity, the sleepless nights, the kicks Elizabeth was living through it right now 3 months ahead. And in a world without pregnancy, books without prenatal care, without a single medical professional within walking distance, the only education available was body-to-body, woman-to-woman, hand-on-belly. Elizabeth could tell Mary what was normal. The nausea passes usually by the end of the first trimester. The fatigue eases, the appetite comes back. The belly shows first a subtle rounding, then unmistakable. She could tell her what to expect from the birth, the pain, the duration, the positions, the breathing, things that midwives knew, things that mothers told daughters, things that had been passed from woman to woman across 1,000 generations without ever being written down. This wasn't a hospital, it wasn't a clinic. It was two women in a courtyard, one with her hand on the other's belly, sharing the oldest curriculum in human history. The days had a pattern. Morning, Mary ground the grain. Alone now, Elizabeth was too large to kneel at the stone. The work was harder, without a partner, but Mary's arms were strong. She had been doing this since she was 8. Mid-morning water. The Ain Karim spring was closer than the Nazareth spring, but steeper. Mary made the trip 2 or 3 times a day. Afternoon, the shared work. Spinning, mending, preparing food. The seated tasks that Elizabeth could still manage. These were the hours when conversation happened long unstructured, the kind that only develops between two people who have nothing to hide from each other. And here's the thing that Luke's single verse doesn't capture for the first time since Gabriel walked through that doorway in Nazareth for the first time in weeks that felt like years. Mary didn't have to pretend. Not at the grinding stone, not at the spring, not at the evening meal. She didn't have to construct a face that hid a secret. She didn't have to measure every word for what it might reveal. She didn't have to perform normalcy for an audience of 200 village neighbors who counted months and watched bellies. In Elizabeth's house, everyone knew. Elizabeth knew. Zechariah knew. He couldn't speak, but he could see, and his wife had shouted the truth loud enough for the whole house to hear the day Mary arrived. For 90 days, Mary lived without the mask. That sounds like a small thing. It isn't. If you've ever carried a secret that could ruin your life, carried it for days, weeks performing normality while your inside screamed, then you know what it means when someone takes the weight. Not half of it, not part of it, just takes it.
Thank you,
holds
Elizabeth.
it with you, lets you put it down for a minute. There's a detail here that's easy to miss, and it changes how you read everything that comes after.
You can.
For the first time in her life, Mary slept alone. In Nazareth, she slept on the floor beside her mother.
You have been believed
Every night for 20
believed,
plus
and
years,
that has
Anna's
made me
breathing was the
someone
soundtrack
new.
of her sleep.
The rest
Anna's
belongs
body
to
heat
you,
was the
Mary.
warmth she fell asleep to. The proximity was total. The privacy was zero.
Elizabeth.
In Elizabeth's house, Mary had her own room, a small room, maybe a storage space, converted for a guest. But her own. A door she could close, a mat she could lie on without anyone else's body 12 inches away. For 90 nights, she processed what had happened to her. Not in the darkness of a shared floor with her parents breathing beside her, but in solitude, in a space where she could think without being overheard, where she could put her hand on her belly without anyone seeing, where she could cry if she needed to, or pray if she needed to, or simply lie still and feel the slow changes happening inside her body alone in the quiet, without performance. This privacy, this tiny ordinary luxury that Elizabeth's slightly larger house provided, may have been the thing that saved her, because by the time she returned to Nazareth, she had to put the mask back on. She had to walk into the village with a changing body and a story nobody believed. She had to face Joseph, face Anna, face the well and the synagogue and the eyes. She could do that. She could survive that because she'd had 90 days to become someone who could. Luke 1:56, Mary stayed with her about 3 months and then returned to her home. The word returned is doing a lot of work in that sentence. She isn't going home to rest. She's going home to face what she left. Nazareth hasn't changed while she was gone. 200 people, one well, one synagogue, zero privacy. And now 3 months later, her body has changed in ways that loose clothing can slow but not hide.
And the baby
Elizabeth
knows you
reaches
were
forward,
here.
adjusts Mary's head, covering,
see you
smoothing a
again
fold,
soon,
tucking a
Elizabeth.
strand of dark hair.
I know.
The gesture is
I miss
pure
you
mothering.
already.
The same gesture Anna would make, the same gesture women have made over daughters and nieces and cousins for 10,000 years. Mary holds still, accepts it, looks at Elizabeth's face lined warm, bright with 90 days of shared knowledge. Then she turns, steps onto the road, and starts walking north. She is walking back to everything she ran from. The village, the whispers, the well, Joseph, Anna, the grinding stone. But she is not the same woman who left. She has been believed, she has been taught, she has been held. She has slept in her own room for 90
feel it in
nights.
my bones.
She has felt another woman's baby
Nazareth.
kick beneath her hand
It's
and
close.
understood in her body what her own future
Just
holds.
ahead, Mary.
And she has spent 3 months in a house where her voice was the loudest voice in the room, a house where a priest was silent and 2 pregnant women filled the space with their own words, their own stories, their own laughter. That's what she carries back to Nazareth. Not a plan, not a defense, not proof, just the memory of being known. The memory of Elizabeth's voice in the doorway saying, "Blessed are you," 90 days, one verse. Luke didn't think the details mattered. Or maybe he knew that the details, the grinding stone
time
and the
is
courtyard
almost
conversations,
here.
and the hand on the
We are
belly and the
ready.
laughter and the silent
And the
priest
joy of the
and the
Lord
private
is
room
my
and the 90
strength.
nights of rest
I
were
cannot
too
fathom
ordinary to
this.
record. But ordinary
The
is what
truth
saved her.
eludes me.
Not a miracle, not an angel,
Perhaps
not a
silence
sign
is
from
the
heaven,
answer.
just an old woman
The
with a
morning
swollen
begins
belly
again.
and a warm house
Yes, but the rest
and the
makes
willingness
it all
to say
worthwhile,
stay.
Mary. Look,
Stay as
the
long as
first
you
star.
need, eat my
Beautiful,
bread,
isn't
drink
it?
my water,
Another day
sleep
done.
in my room. And when
Your
you're ready,
hands have seen
when
a
you're strong
long
enough,
journey,
go back
Mary.
and face what's waiting.
But they brought me here to
Mary
you,
walked
Elizabeth.
north, 150
They are
kilometers
strong
of
now.
dust and hills, and the slow return to the world that didn't understand her. But she walked it different than she'd walked it before. She walked it like a woman who had been believed.
But she
and that it
carries in
turns
her
out was
chest
enough.
the unshakable knowledge that she was believed. That is enough.